Chapter 1. The Perfect Beginning. It started like the kind of love story people write about in books. The kind you don't just fall into, but dive into, breathless and wide-eyed. They saw you in a way no one else ever had. The way they looked at you, like you were a secret the world had missed, made you feel chosen, special, safe. They listened so closely, laughed at all the right moments, asked questions that made you feel seen instead of just heard. They texted good morning. They remembered tiny details. They said they'd never felt this kind of connection before. And a part of you whispered, "Neither have I." Sure, they got a little jealous sometimes. They didn't like when you posted certain pictures. They bristled when you mentioned an old friend's name. But that wasn't controlling, right? That was just passion. That was just someone who cared deeply. Everyone around you said you were glowing. They said love looked good on you. But what they didn't see, and what you wouldn't see for a while, was that beneath the warm glow was the flicker of something else. Subtle self-doubt, tiny compromises, quiet hesitations you swallowed without knowing why. You weren't falling in love. You were being pulled, gently, then completely, into something that looked like love, but came with a price, and somewhere just beneath the high of being wanted, you were already beginning to lose yourself. Kantoana Chapter 2. The First Red Flag. You excused it was small, almost forgettable. A sharp tone when you brought up something innocent. A strange, lingering silence after you said no to something minor. They changed, just for a moment, and then it passed. They laughed it off. "I'm just tired," they said. "I didn't mean it like that." And because the beginning was so perfect, because they'd been so warm, so intoxicatingly attentive, you let it go. You told yourself everyone slips up. You told yourself you were being too sensitive. And when they apologized with soft eyes or pulled you close that night like nothing happened, it felt safer to believe the best. It felt easier to pretend it was nothing. But it was something. It was a moment, subtle and slippery, when your gut whispered, "Something's not right," and your mind overruled it with, "But look at how much they love you." You didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a pattern. Minimize, justify, forgive, repeat. The first red flag never screams. It flickers, soft enough to ignore, but strong enough to dim your sense of reality. And just like that, your intuition took a step back, and love, or what you thought was love, took another dangerous step forward. Chapter 3. The Isolation Game. At first, it felt like devotion, the way they wanted you all to themselves, the way they said, "I just miss you when you're not around," as if your presence was air and they were drowning without it. You stopped going out as much. You laughed and said, "I'm just in a relationship now," when your friends pointed out how rare you'd become. But you didn't feel the absence. Not at first. You felt chosen. You felt kept. Until it wasn't closeness, it was containment. Subtle disapproval when you made plans without them. A shift in their voice when you spoke of someone who once made you smile. Questions that sounded like concern, but always ended in guilt. You stopped sharing little things, your wins, your jokes, your moments, because they either dismissed them or made you feel wrong for having them without them. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow unthreading, a quiet rearranging of your world until they were at the center, and everything else faded to the edges. And the saddest part? You thought this was love. You thought love meant merging. You didn't know that love without freedom is just a prettier cage. By the time you noticed how alone you'd become, you were already too far inside the silence. Chapter 4. The mirror starts to crack. You used to know who you were, sharp, certain, steady in your skin, but now every conversation feels like a courtroom. Every emotion is on trial. "I never said that. You're remembering it wrong. Why are you always so dramatic?" And suddenly you are. You doubt your words. You replay moments over and over like a scratched record, trying to hear the truth beneath the static. You start apologizing for things you don't understand. You shrink before you even know why you're sorry. You call it compromise, but it feels like walking on eggshells barefoot. They never yell, not often anyway, but their silence is louder than any scream. Their disappointment is a fog you can't escape, and so you edit yourself. You clip your voice at the edges. You wear your moods like masks, adjusting them to keep the peace. But something's wrong, you're disappearing. Piece by piece, reflection by reflection. And one night, looking in the mirror, you don't recognize the person staring back. Not because they look different, but because they've grown so quiet inside. This is not love. This is erasure wrapped in affection, gaslighting dressed in gentle tones. The mirror hasn't shattered yet, but the cracks are showing, and they only get deeper from here. Chapter 5. The roller coaster of love. Bombs and silent treatments. Just when you start to pull away, when your instincts whisper, "This isn't right," they turn into everything you ever hoped they'd be. They hold your face like it's made of glass. They speak in apologies soaked in poetry. They say they've never felt this way before, and you believe them, because the high is blinding. Suddenly they're warm again, attentive, electric. You laugh like you used to. You think maybe it was just a rough patch. But love shouldn't feel like gambling. Shouldn't be so good it feels like oxygen, only to be ripped away without warning. Because when they withdraw, they really withdraw. No messages, no eye contact, no explanation. Just a cold front that settles over the relationship like winter overnight. And you spiral. You beg. You plead. You apologize for things you don't understand, just to make the silence stop screaming. And then they come back, smiling, loving, as if nothing happened, and the cycle spins again. You're not addicted to them. You're addicted to the contrast, the starvation and the feast, the drought and the downpour. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, but to you it just feels like love that's always one step away from vanishing. And deep down, a quiet part of you starts to ask, if love hurts this much, is it really love at all? Chapter 6. The rewrite of reality. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no switch you can point to, no single moment when the truth was taken. But one day you wake up and realize you don't trust your own memory anymore. You remember them saying something cruel, but they insist it never happened. You feel hurt, but they say you're too sensitive. You want to set a boundary, but suddenly you're the villain. And so slowly, carefully, you begin to question yourself. Maybe you did overreact. Maybe you are too emotional. Maybe they're just trying to help, and you're too damaged to see it. You start keeping secrets, not from them, but from yourself. You rewrite events in your mind, soften their edges, erase your own pain in the margins, just to keep the story pretty. Because it's easier to be wrong than to believe the person you love is hurting you. They don't just gaslight you, they hand you the pen, and you start editing your life for them until your reality belongs to their version of the truth. And here's the hardest part. You defend them, to your friends, to your family, to the mirror. You build a cage with your own hands and name it understanding. But it's not understanding, it's erasure. It's losing your voice word by word until you only speak in their language. And by the time you realize how far you've drifted, you don't know how to tell your story anymore, because it's no longer yours. Chapter 7. The apology that never comes. You wait for it. That moment when they'll say, "I hurt you, and I see it now." The moment when their eyes will soften, when the puzzle pieces will finally click into place, when everything will make sense. But it never arrives. Instead, you get the half-hearted shrug, the blame turned inside out. You're always so quick to judge. "I said I was sorry, didn't I?" Or worse, "If you just stop overthinking everything, we wouldn't be here." And so you start apologizing for even needing an apology. You begin to carry their pain like it's your own debt. You bend until your spine forgets what straight feels like. You whisper, "It's okay," even when it's not. Because asking for accountability feels like picking a fight you'll always lose. But what you're really losing is you. Psychology calls this trauma bonding, when the same person who wounds you also becomes the only one who can soothe you. And so you crave their approval like medicine, even as they're the ones making you sick. You keep the door open, waiting, You keep your voice soft, hoping. But deep down, you start to realize they're not going to say what you need to hear, because to apologize, they'd have to admit what they did. And to admit it, they'd have to care more about your truth than protecting their own illusion. And for people like them, that is a bridge they will never cross. Chapter 8. The breaking point. It doesn't look like a dramatic exit. There's no shouting match, no suitcase thrown on the curb. Sometimes it's quiet, a stillness that falls inside your chest, so loud it silences every excuse you've ever made for them. You don't scream. You just stop explaining. Stop justifying. Stop hoping that this time will be different. You wake up and feel it. The weight of all the moments you betrayed yourself just to keep them close. It hits you in waves. How often you begged for scraps of love from someone who held the whole feast but kept you starving out of cruelty or carelessness. You realize you've been living in survival mode, managing moods, tracking silences, tiptoeing through a maze that keeps changing. And suddenly, exhaustion becomes clarity. It's not just that they hurt you, it's that you've been hurting yourself by staying, by believing that their potential was more real than the pain they kept causing. The human psyche can only bend so far before it starts to break. And today, something inside you doesn't bend anymore. It hardens, not out of hate, but out of self-respect, finally waking up from its long, haunted sleep. And in that moment, you don't even need their apology. You don't need closure. You just need to leave, even if your feet are trembling, even if your voice shakes when you say, "Enough." Because that shaking, that's the sound of chains breaking, and your freedom begins exactly where their control ends. Chapter 9. The aftermath. You left, but the echoes stayed. At first, there's a strange silence, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just loud. You check your phone instinctively, half expecting a message, half dreading it. It doesn't come, and when it finally does, it's not an apology. It's bait, a breadcrumb trail meant to pull you back into the same cycle dressed in slightly softer words. You almost fall for it. Almost. But this time, there's a crack of light where the fog used to be. You begin to remember who you were before them. Not all at once, but in fragments. Your laugh, your opinions, your boundaries. And then comes the grief. Grief for the love you gave that was never truly received. Grief for the version of you that tried so hard. Grief for the time lost inside a beautiful lie. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth, the slow, painful becoming that happens after a soul has been scraped bare. And you start to see it, how you weren't weak. You were loyal. You were hopeful. You loved fully in a place that didn't know how to hold it. You begin to rebuild, not like you were before, but as someone new. Someone softer in their strength, wiser in their warmth, and no longer hungry for a love that costs you your peace. Because now you know, real love doesn't burn you to keep you close. The inner shift. It doesn't arrive like thunder. There's no dramatic soundtrack, no spotlight. Just a quiet moment, maybe on a walk, maybe while washing the dishes, when you realize you're no longer waiting to be chosen. You've chosen yourself. The ache is still there, but it doesn't define you anymore. You feel it like an old scar. Proof not of weakness, but of survival. You start asking different questions now. Not, why didn't they love me right? But why did I think that was the best I could get? Not how do I get them back, but how do I get me back? And piece by piece you do. You unlearn the silence. You relearn your needs. Not as inconveniences, but as truths worth honoring. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. Stop romanticizing emotional chaos. You understand that love isn't about chasing someone who's always running. It's about resting in someone who stays. You meet yourself at the center, not the wounded version of you that begged for crumbs, but the version who is whole. Not because they were never broken, but because they put themselves back together. And that's the real shift. Not external, not flashy, but internal. A quiet recalibration of your worth. You no longer orbit others hoping to be seen. You are your own sun now. And from here on out, you don't settle for anyone who makes you dim your light just to be near theirs.